Welcome to the Omnibus Podcast, where all subjects are germane. A new political podcast to discuss Minnesota politics, public policy, legislation, inside and outside of the Capitol. I'm your host, Jeremy Munson, a state representative from here in southern Minnesota, broadcasting from deep in my bunker in my government-compliant, socially distant location. Today we'll be discussing the Emergency Powers Act with Representatives Steve Draz and Cal. It's one of the most common things we hear about from people is, how does the governor have all these powers and how do we end it? We'll talk about all the different options we have with these two representatives. Also, we'll be meeting with Representative-elect Erik Mortensen and introducing him and talking about the policy that he wants to get passed, talking about a couple of bipartisan issues that he's working on with term limits and shared parenting. We'll also be talking about the budget. Fun stuff. So I hope you stay tuned and subscribe to the podcast. Hope to put these out weekly here at the Capitol and discussing this legislation in greater detail. So thank you so much for tuning in to the Omnibus Podcast, where all subjects are germane. Okay, well, in this first episode of the Omnibus Podcast, we're going to be discussing the Emergency Powers Act, which is one of the most common emails that I get as a legislator from constituents saying, how does the governor have these authority and how do we end it? So with me today are Representatives Cal and Steve Draz, and we're going to have a discussion about the Emergency Powers Act. So Steve, can you walk us through the Emergency Powers Act and what's in the statute, what is in law, and where does the governor get his authority to do this?
Okay, Jeremy. So the Section 12.31 in Minnesota statute is the Emergency Powers Act, and it includes a section or a subdivision on the ability for the governor to also declare a peacetime emergency. That's under subdivision 2 under Section 12.31 in Minnesota statute. And I'll read it. It says, the governor may declare a peacetime emergency, period. A peacetime declaration of emergency may be declared only when an act of nature, a technological failure or malfunction, a terrorist incident, an industrial accident, a hazardous materials accident, or a civil disturbance endangers life and property and local government resources are inadequate to handle the situation.
So that's a long list of reasons why the governor can declare a peacetime emergency, but obviously absent from that is a public health crisis.
Well, it is, and before we get to public health crisis, it's important to note here that it says and. These words and in statute are real important, and we haven't talked about one of these, Cal. Representative Munson and I were talking about this earlier. It says endangers life and property.
Right. I don't think coronavirus is doing anything to threaten anybody's property.
No, government is though.
No,
they're doing a serious taking here.
The government's endangering all of our property. But the point is that if you say public health crisis or public health issue is covered under this, which the governor does, and he did when he invoked this originally and has each time for each of the last 8 months since, if you say that public health issue is included in these descriptions or in the history of the statute or however you want to say it, it may still not qualify because it says it has to
endanger life and property.
Endanger life and property, and local government resources are inadequate to handle the situation. So it has to endanger life and property, and there not be the money or other resources for local government to handle their situation.
So and the governor gets these powers by saying that the virus is an act of nature, but we're arguing that the virus doesn't endanger property; it only endangers life at best. But about 7 days before the governor issued his declaration of emergency, Representative Liebling in the Health and Human Services Committee brought forward a bill to add public health crisis or public health emergency to the reasons why he could declare an emergency, and that bill never was introduced in the Senate, and it never passed the Democrat-controlled House, so it is not law.
Right. Yeah, that was an interesting argument in there. She didn't. Part of the her bill was also it introduced the public health crisis, and it also changed it from the legislature having to be given the opportunity to take away the king's authority and resume their rightful role in government from 30 days to 90 days. She wanted to allow a single person to run all the affairs of the state for 90 days in addition to that. And we've seen what damage can be done in 30 days. Imagine what would be done in 90 days.
Right, without the legislature having the authority to overturn it. Now, let's dive into that last piece that Draz talked about in the legislation in 1231 sub 2, where it says that the local resources, so that, it has active nature, fire, flood, chemical spill, industrial accident, that kind of stuff, but where the local resources are not adequate. So if you have a flood and it's in the Red River Valley, and these counties on the border have the equipment, the sandbagging, they don't need the state resources. The governor can't come in and declare an emergency. It's only when the local resources are not sufficient. Now, the federal government has been sending money to the counties. They got huge checks, millions of dollars to use for COVID. Hospitals are staffed or getting staffed. There are counties in Minnesota where they do have the adequate resources to combat COVID. Could they come forward as a county commissioners and say, we're going to pass a resolution that says, Governor Walz, your state of emergency doesn't apply to our county because we have the resources? Wouldn't that be a way to end the peacetime emergency county by county?
I think it could, and it probably should. It would certainly provide the ability for truth to be stated by these local units of government, especially in the context of this statute that we have claimed for the longest time since the beginning of these peacetime emergency powers. We've put the question forward, does local government have the resources they need? And along the way, many times we've said, yes, they have the resources they need. Therefore, this statute doesn't apply and the governor doesn't have that authority anymore. And so if we do have counties that are willing to do that, or cities, ideally counties, that would be willing to come forward and put a resolution together and say, you know what, we do have the resources we need to deal with COVID in our county. That would be a huge statement that then could be used by people all across Minnesota to strongly ask the question, should this peacetime emergency be happening in X county? And I think the answer to that would be no. Right.
Well, and if we'll just call it Freedom County, if Freedom County came forward and declared they had the adequate resources, then the emergency powers wouldn't apply. And then the restrictions on schools, or the restrictions on restaurants and bars and all of these executive orders that people are hating right now, they wouldn't apply to Freedom County, right?
Right. Yeah. So we need Freedom County to step forward.
Yeah. So you can go out to our website. If you go to the newhousegop.com/reopenmn, we'll put out some information on how to get in touch with your local county and a sample resolution that you can download and actually bring to your county commissioners, send it to them through email, do a Zoom call with them, and get them to come over to Freedomville and reopen their county.
And the other part of that, again, is it says has to endanger life and property, and local resources aren't available. We haven't really focused on property up until recently, as we just started talking about it. Another question that exists, and really a corollary to this, is has property been endangered by the virus itself, like you would if you'd have a flood or a tornado or a fire or the traditional types of peacetime emergencies you would expect? And really the reason I think the history and the law exists is to give, it was written originally as a conduit to give the ability for state government to bring resources, largely federal FEMA resources, to those local units of government. And that's why it was written for that, in the idea that it could endanger life and property, and the local government couldn't handle paying for it themselves. That is the context around which this statute was written.
So, Cal Barr, do you think in this day and age of Zoom calls and the ability for legislators to scramble and come together in committees and stuff and write legislation, do you think this is even necessary to have an Emergency Powers Act that grants unilateral lawmaking authority to some sovereign over Minnesota?
The short answer is no. I mean, we have been since April, since Easter break. So sometime in April when we came back from our Easter break, we've been pretty much 100%, almost 100% Zoom. Steve, you were on the floor for the last special session. Was there, 8, 9? Do you remember how many legislators were on the floor?
Yeah, one of those special sessions, I counted 8 members out of 134 in the House that were actually there. So the other 126 were operating remotely over Zoom or a telephone. So we become a Zoom legislature over the last 8 months.
Yeah. So if a flood hits, next winter, or hits now and we're not in session, we could presumably be on a Zoom call and get dialed into this thing and take care of legislation for emergency purposes, like within 24 hours. So
right.
I argue that this isn't even necessary. But let's talk about the other ways to get rid of the emergency powers. So we have the in statute, it says within 5 days of declaring a peacetime emergency, the executive council must meet to affirmatively approve, like actually vote to approve his powers. Cal, who's on the executive committee?
Well, the executive committee is made up of 5. They're all the constitutional offices of the state of Minnesota. So it's the governor, Democrat, the lieutenant governor, a Democrat, secretary of state, former Democrat legislator, so Democrat, Keith Ellison, former Democrat congressperson, so definitely a Democrat, and the auditor, Bleha, and she's pretty much said she's a Democrat too. So we have an echo chamber.
Okay, so his council of 5 approves his powers, and then after 30 days, and this is where the media always gets it wrong, the legislature needs to be called back so that they can come back and vote to approve the governor's powers, because that's what they always say in the headlines.
That's not correct. It's the other direction. The legislature is afforded the opportunity to rescind. And both chambers of the legislature have to affirmatively vote to rescind. And if the governor controls any chamber, he can keep his powers indefinitely.
So the only thing we can do is undo his power.
Right. You can end his power and with it all of his executive orders, but we're not actually required to vote on this powers. That's what people get wrong too.
Correct.
We have the opportunity to bring it up. So if we don't want it and we're in the minority, can we actually vote on it?
No. What we vote on is we do actually take a vote. We bring the resolution and we have to suspend the rules because we're not following normal procedures. So the rules have to be suspended. You need 90 votes. It's 2/3 to suspend rules.
Yep. Yes, 90 votes.
90 votes to suspend. And that's the vote we actually take. Are we going to suspend the rules, or are we going to send this rescission of power legislation to committee, or are we going to take it up immediately on the floor? And so that's the suspension part. That always fails on a pretty much almost, but not exclusively, almost party line vote. But 90 votes is all the Republicans plus 30 Democrats.
Yeah.
So you have plenty of votes that the majority can give up and still maintain their power, and then say, well, we had a vote. Well, you didn't have a vote. You had a procedural vote on whether you were going to suspend the rules. So then they send it to committee because the vote fails, and then we adjourn special session, and it dies in committee.
Right, and it's important to note we have had one clean vote on the underlying resolution to end, and that was after Doubt made a deal with Hortman, some backroom thing to get a deal to actually vote on it, but only when she knew that they wouldn't have a majority of legislators vote to end the powers.
Correct.
So if she feels that there's a majority of legislators who will vote to end the peacetime emergency, she just will not let it come up for a clean vote. She won't even assign it to be calendared for a bill that we'll discuss. And so That's where we're stuck. Now, the Senate has passed it several times.
Yeah, and we're stuck specifically in that case in a special session during the special sessions that have been called in the context of a special session where the quote leaders and a lot of times the governor too, but the leaders of the legislature want it to get done within one day. So if you need it to get done within one day, then you need that special procedural vote in order to bring it up for an immediate vote. If we're in regular session in January, we can find ourselves in situations where we can find a way to bring the bill forward. And I think there will be more creativity that will be able to happen then and possibly give us a chance to get that actual vote in front of the body.
Right. And Draz, you were the author of the very first resolution to end the peacetime emergency. Actually, we were all authors, but you were the chief author. And we did a lot of research on how you get this done correctly and have been really leading the charge on trying to bring this up every single chance we get. So the other way to end the peacetime emergency powers is through the court system.
Oh, let's dig into the court system, shall we? So we... the caucus and a few other, there was Business Alliance and a bunch of different people around the state. So we're not the only ones on this, but there are numerous members that filed a lawsuit in court. 13.
Yeah,
Yep.
Back in May. Way
back. Yeah, all the way back in May when we were still in session. We were, just right after session, we filed this. Filed it the week after session. So it actually goes to the court. We file, there's 3 charges, like the Minnesota State Constitution does not allow for a legislative veto. We're surrendering our authority. There's 3, and I'll let Jeremy dig into the 3 specifics there. But the part that I want to talk about with the court system is our judges are all appointed by the governor. And when you've had the same party control for 14 years, now going on 15 years, you have a plethora of judges who all have paid homage to the king in some form or fashion. I'm thinking of one very specific appointee that was a former Speaker of the House. A highly partisan position is now been put into a position where he is expected to have a nonpartisan ruling thing. That's just not going to happen. I mean, that's a very public, very pointed example. But that has happened through a lot of our court system. And now, so we have actually two issues here. We have actually had our first hearing in court, and it took the judge afterwards, 45 days to actually issue a ruling and then appeal to, we whoever won is going to appeal. We understand that until this finally makes it to the Supreme Court. But we're talking... It's January or almost January now, the last couple of days of December, and we haven't even been heard in the appeals court. So the whole judicial system, this is something that affects every Minnesotan, and it can't get fast-tracked to get an immediate hearing and get pushed to the front. And then we have what I would call a partisan judicial thing because of the fact that we have had one party appointing all of the judges. It's getting more and more lopsided to a strictly partisan deal.
Yeah, and I mean that's the big question that people always ask me is, do you think this would actually pass the Minnesota Supreme Court in your favor because there's more Democratic appointees on the court? And I mean, Erik Mortensen, our attorney, he does talk about how this is really a constitutional issue. This is not a hyper-partisan issue. It isn't like we're determining the fate of gay marriage. We're just talking about the imbalance of power in that our state requires. A balance of power, and the governor has exceeded his authority. So the judicial branch, just like the legislative branch, should have concern. And so he thinks it should be a purely constitutional decision, and it should be in our favor. But you're right. We've also filed a case in federal court because the federal jurists tend to be more conservative. But that, too, it takes a long time to be heard in court. So right now, when people ask us where the lawsuit's at, you can go out to GoFundMe.com/StopWalz, and that is where our links to all the lawsuit. And of course, we've done a lot of fundraising. We've raised almost $40,000 for attorney's fees. So your taxpayer dollars are not paying to fight this, but you're paying Keith Ellison's salary. So
He's been real helpful.
Yeah. So again, the legislative veto prohibition, there isn't anything in our state constitution that allows a legislative veto. This really reverses the process. The legislature should write laws, not the governor. And so if the governor were to declare a peacetime emergency, and then after 30 days, if the legislature were required to each, body to vote yes, approve it, then the Senate could stop it. But right now, the governor can write law unilaterally. He can spend money unilaterally without the Republican-controlled Senate having any say in it.
So think about this, Jeremy. So we've got the governor writing pure law, including criminal and civil penalties if you don't follow his edicts. And he's purely writing pure law with these things. And then our statute in the process is asking the legislature to allow it to go or to veto it. Now, something is upside down and inside out here. The legislature is supposed to be writing the law. The governor is supposed to be signing or vetoing the legislation brought forward. The separation of powers was violated. Article 3, Section 1, the Minnesota Constitution, that says no branch of government shall usurp the powers of another branch. That's one of our main arguments in our constitutional lawsuit. The other one is the legislative veto, which, by the way, 9 or 10 other states and federally have had this challenged where their states or the federal government has had a legislative veto in law where the legislature is vetoing something the executive does, like we have here. And in every one of those cases, the court in jurisdiction found them to be unconstitutional. Every single one. That's why we think we're going to win here.
Yeah, it's a 1980s case in the U.S. Supreme Court, and it's IRS v. Chadha, and it found legislative vetoes to be unconstitutional. And this non-delegation doctrine, where this isn't just Walz's fault. The legislature wrote into law something that gives up its authority to write law to the executive branch. That violates the non-delegation doctrine. So there's a few different ways we can get rid of this thing. I hope we can get some legs under this issue of going after the counties, trying to find Freedom County in Minnesota to say, no walls, we've got it. You don't need to have your edicts allowed here anymore. That would be great. The court cases will be going forward. We're in front of the appellate court, hopefully in the spring, and maybe even this winter. And we hope to get legs, and of course the legislative session coming back. So call your legislator, make sure that they're voting to end the peacetime emergency. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining me on this first podcast for the Omnibus Podcast, where all subjects are germane.
And we did have freedom in the discussion too, of course.
Right.
And we talk about freedoms. Okay, welcome back. We've got Representative-elect Erik Mortensen joining us now. More than just joining us, he's joining our caucus at the new House Republican Caucus. So, Erik, is it Erik or Mort? How do we refer to you?
Whatever you prefer. It doesn't matter to me.
Well, how do you want to be known in Minnesota? You're building your name. You want to be Mort?
Well, everybody in my family's Mort, so I'll go by Mort.
Okay, well, welcome, Mort, to the new House Republican Caucus.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. It was kind of a no-brainer. And I will say this. I gave it a college effort here. I did go to a caucus meeting, and when a certain minority leader was reelected, it made the choice pretty easy to join you guys.
Well, it's been a frustration of ours, too. Cal and Draz are with us here, too. Cal, you're excited to see Mort come to St. Paul?
Oh yeah, it's gonna be an interesting year. No matter how you slice it, welcome to the team.
Thank you.
You bring things to you're going to fill another gap in our knowledge base. With only 4 of us, we can't know everything. So you're bringing another mind, another perspective. It's going to be great to have you.
Wait a minute, you guys are politicians. You're supposed to know everything.
Oh yeah, right. That's what staff's for.
So you're right. You do fill a void, but also there's a problem because when there were 4 of us, we were known as the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, right? They came out. Remember the 4 horsemen? They kept them referring us. Well, now there's 5. So what are we going to be now that there's 5? Anybody have ideas?
25% stronger.
That's right.
That would be a correct answer.
That's good, Draz. That's good.
So I'm Jeremy. I'm real excited for Mort to join us because the tenacity that he's shown. working not only through the last biennium, fighting and winning the endorsement, winning the primary, and just barely not making it in a very, very difficult year for Republicans in the suburbs. He saw that and the experience reflected back on it and came back, built his team bigger and stronger in his district and has spread the word of liberty throughout the Shakopee area and now beyond. And we need more fighters for freedom. Definitely Mort is a fighter for freedom like each and every one of us are in this caucus, and it's just going to be a great addition as we build a stronger case for freedom here in Minnesota.
Well, that's fantastic, Draz. So Mort, give me an example of something that will shock the liberals in your district that you actually support, because it's amazing when I was up in St. Paul, it was wow, this guy's going to be the conservative in St. Paul, but then there's actually a lot of stuff that the liberals in my district are shocked that I'm for, like whether it's running interference to lobbyists and trying to prevent their special interest groups from manhandling legislators and forcing through their crappy legislation, or term limits and things like that. What do you support that liberals in your district are going to be watching going, oh, actually that's pretty good?
Yeah, like we were talking earlier, I'm not much of a red hat, blue hat kind of a guy. I'm looking at how do we advance the notion of liberty, and one of those things that I've talked about a lot over the last year is equal shared parenting, a starting presumption of equal shared parenting. And I know there's a handful, or I think there's a lot of Democrats that support that, and they were very close to passing that last go around. But the guy that I took out in the primary election, or not the primary, in the general election, was literally the deciding vote, and why that thing didn't get through last time around.
Yeah, that was amazing to watch on the floor as she held that vote open while they went around and arm-twisted
8 votes.
Yeah, it's amazing. It is such a bipartisan issue, and we've got people on the Republican side that are absolutely opposed to shared parenting, and we've been people on the Democrat side too. But most people, and it's a very populist thing, they appreciate it.
Yeah. And I got to jump on what Draz was saying, that supporters, I worked my butt off to grow support and meet with people, and I heard it consistently that you're the only one that actually reached out and wanted to sit with me and understand my needs. And it was so rewarding after the election when a handful of supporters gave me, and it just goes to show how well I got to know them and how well they got to know me. They gave me a machete mounted on a wooden plank and said, hack up the swamp. So that'll be hanging in my legislative office.
Fantastic. Yeah. I love that.
I love it. I just want to make a comment back to what Mort was talking about shared parenting. And you guys were talking about, Cal said there was a shift of 8 votes that happened that as Hortman, the speaker, held the board open and they twisted arms in the background. You guys, that was the divorce industry at work. And that is the swamp in the divorce industry working in order to get their outcome. That's them tugging on their political campaign dollars at work for ostensibly both caucuses, but certainly in the Democrat caucus in that particular example that we saw going on right there live in front of us.
Yeah, and for those of you listening there, don't follow it closely. It is a very sexist policy to not support shared parenting, because there's an assumption that, men have the money in a relationship and they're the ones that are going to have to pay more money to get their kids. And that's really what it comes down to, why they make men fight for right to see their kids more.
Well, and Jeremy, it's also the divorce industry. It's the custody evaluators, it's the judges, it's the prosecutors, it's the guardian ad litems. It's all of those groups all of the government that we have built in social services around, quote, the interests of the child, the government parents, if you will, that we have propped up there that do a horrible job at raising kids, by the way. They wreck kids is what ends up happening. But it is their interests that are the ones that are pervasive in the political arena, because they're here and they're here lobbying those legislators, telling them, no, you got to vote against the other parents in these relationships. It should be equal parenting, and we need more of the parents. We need more of the kids here. We need more of the grandparents here. We need more Minnesotans here at the Capitol telling us, because we know what the answer is there, and it's not the interests of the divorce industry that they would bring here.
Yeah, in order to get them here, we have to open the Capitol up and take down the 8-foot chain link fence, which is now surrounding it. So Mort, you've been now at the legislature getting stuff geared up. You get your badges, you get your office today. You're going to start moving stuff in, and you've seen some of the policy and procedure around this. What's your initial impression of seeing inside the sausage factory?
My initial impression, the first state worker I spoke to, and I just have this disdain speaking to state workers. I think many people do, and they go to the DMV. That's what they envision is talking to a bureaucrat. And honestly, I was quite shocked when I spoke to some people in HR how much different they treated me. It was amazing. I wish they treated the general public this way when you walked into a government institution. But it's been interesting, and there's a lot to be learned here for sure, and I can't wait to get started. I think everybody's on the same page of ending the emergency powers here as soon as possible.
Yeah, well, I think everyone.
So that election certificate you just got becomes relevant again?
Yeah, exactly right.
Every one of us went through it, where we come into the Capitol and we are shocked at how just knowledgeable and impressive and helpful the staff at the Capitol are.
Right.
Because there's a lot of nincompoops that win election and come up here and they need a lot of help.
They make them look good.
They make them look good. But so what's your top agenda? 3 items. What are you going to work on first?
Yeah, I think ending the emergency powers, that's so important. I've been saying the whole time that I ran to remove government-imposed obstacles between people and prosperity. And there's no bigger obstacle right now between people and prosperity than the governor and the emergency powers. Then term limits is another big thing that we've talked about a little bit. I think that's the majority of people, whether you're Republican, Democrat, they want to see people not being career politicians. And I think we need to look at actually advancing some gun rights in Minnesota.
Awesome. Well, we're going to have a lot of fun this year. We have some we have really interesting legislators coming to the Capitol outside of the interesting one across the desk from me here, because we have John Thompson and
who, interestingly enough, is replacing one of the biggest advocates for shared parenting.
Right, Lesh, Democrat representative attorney.
Right.
John Lesh.
That's a good example of where Republicans and Democrats worked cross aisle.
Yeah. In fact, Representative Mortensen, you reached out to a Democrat legislator to talk about shared parenting, didn't you?
Yeah, I reached out to several actually. I'm trying to pin down Representative Rena Moran right now and talk about some things that we have in common.
Yeah, I mean that's great. You're already reaching across the aisle. That alone might surprise some of the liberals in your district that
sure.
You're getting to work, and it's not just extremism. What?
Well, Jeremy, I was thinking of so John Thompson. He's a Democrat legislator, a representative elect. Is that the guy that threatened to burn down 3 different cities in Minnesota?
Oh, he threatened more than
3 cities.
I think he said Brainerd, Duluth. Come on up. Yeah, he was. It's going to be an interesting. I can't wait to talk about. Sprinkler systems with him. I think every bill is going to go back to well, what would happen if the town burned down?
It's going to be quite the inferno around here.
Yeah, but it'll be interesting to see if we have him in committee in any of my committees. But we're going to get our committee assignments this week, and we're going to get started sworn in next week. And Representative Mortensen, Mort, we're excited to have you, and welcome to the new House Republican Caucus.
Yeah, thanks, guys.